so we have just one session before we get before lunch, and then we've got 3 breakout sessions in the afternoon. All right, so to kick things off for scale track, am I still? Okay, cool. We've got Cerner, and they're going to tell you about scaling JIRA. They started in 2008, and they've got a really great story for you. And I'm really excited to introduce our speakers, and they're still reeling from a recent victory for the Royals, so cool. Join me in welcoming Brian and Mike to the stage.
Can everybody hear me? All right. Welcome. It's a privilege to speak at Summit. Having the morning session on the last day of the conference, following the bash, I was wondering what kind of attendance we might have, and this is awesome. Almost looks like it's standing room only. So I was also wondering how many people would be wearing their dark shades after the bash last night, but it looks like you guys are alert, ready to go. So hopefully we can entertain you here for a few minutes. So scaling JIRA, challenge accepted. Whoops, got a little hasty. We wanted to start this off with a video to help set the context of the discussion. So bear with us, it's about a minute long. I think you'll enjoy it.
That's not good.
Oh, I don't need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry. Somebody! Hello? There are 2 people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something?
Help!
I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
Well, there's not enough left to do, is there?
So at this point, you're probably wondering, what does being stuck on an escalator have to do with scaling JIRA? It's a funny video, but what's the relation? Well, as I was putting this presentation together and I was sitting down, my 7-year-old was beside me. He's like, Dad, why don't they just walk up the steps? And I was like, well, we've become so dependent upon the systems and the tools and the infrastructure around us just working that when that infrastructure or those tools aren't available, sometimes we lose our minds and we forget what to do. And so in our environment at Cerner, that's what JIRA is at this point. We've got at Cerner Corporation, we're a large healthcare IT company. Mike and I are responsible for managing the development infrastructure, the development tools that our software engineering teams use. And JIRA, we're working on a project right now to standardize the issue tracking system at Cerner all on JIRA across the different departments. And so when JIRA has performance issues or scale issues, this is how our users react. Right? They find new and creative ways to get a hold of Mike and I and stress the importance that JIRA plays in our environment, and they want to know how soon we're going to have that back up and running for them. So that being said, let's take a minute and talk about our environment. So at Cerner, we've got 3 JIRA instances. As Aileen mentioned, we started in 2008. We had a single JIRA server, JIRA 1, and as you can see, naming is our specialty. We are extremely good at it. We started with JIRA 1 in 2008. We started on a single team, about 20 users. We were replacing a homegrown issue tracking system. We were looking for something better. The other thing that was happening around that time is that we had a number of other development teams that were setting up their own Bugzilla servers. And we were looking for a solution that would help us centralize these operations and give these teams the customizations that they needed, all from, like I say, being able to be managed by a central group. And JIRA was that for us. So as JIRA started gaining popularity, that's when we had to figure out a way to scale it. And so we started to have performance issues and scale issues. So the method that we chose at the time was around 2012 is we purchased 2 additional JIRA licenses. Now we didn't set them up right away. but as we continued to grow, we've spread the load across these 3 servers. Now, I don't want to leave you at this point thinking that our approach to scaling is to keep buying JIRA licenses. That's not where we're going with this. As you notice, for JIRA 2, we recently implemented JIRA Data Center. And Mike's going to talk toward the end of this discussion as to why we did that and what role that plays in our scale strategy going forward. But as you can see, we're in total or in aggregate, we manage about 1.5 million JIRA issues, over 3 million comments and about 1,500 projects. So over the course of this discussion, we're going to give you 6 lessons. What we try to do is walk our journey from 2008 through 2015 and ask ourselves, what are the things that we learned along the way? We feel like we're in a really good place with JIRA right now, and so we did a retrospective on how did we get here. And we broke it down to 6 things that we want you to leave this conversation with, and hopefully you can apply in your environment to help scale JIRA as well. First lesson, stay current. From a strategy perspective, this is probably the easiest thing for you to do. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand that upgrades, no matter what the system is, each one of those is unique, right? Depending on the customizations that you've done or the integrations that you've done. I'm not saying that doing a large upgrade is easy. What I'm saying is, looking back over the course of history for the different JIRA releases that have been done, I pulled these release notes off of Atlassian.com, and I highlighted in each one, the emphasis on performance and the emphasis on scale. And you even heard it in the keynotes this year, at the beginning, that performance is the #1 thing that Atlassian is hearing from its customers that they need to focus on. Our experience has been with each upgrade we've done, performance has gotten better, scale has gotten better, and at the same time, we're throwing additional users and additional complexity to the environment. Each one of the stars along the timeline on the bottom represents where we did a JIRA upgrade within our journey. Notice we started on 3.13, was the first version that we ever used, and we're currently on 6.3.12. So, recap, first lesson, easiest lesson, stay current. We try to upgrade about once a year. We've talked about doing twice a year, but with the different infrastructure, different solutions that we manage, about once a year is what we muster today. Okay. Lesson 2, standardize where possible. I pulled these graphs off of Atlassian.com. They have a scale document, and they posted some of the performance testing they've done around JIRA 6.4. And I thought these graphs were particularly telling. On the left side, it talks about custom fields. And the purpose of the graph is to show that there are common tasks that your users perform every day, such as viewing all issues or creating issues, editing issues, et cetera, whose performance is directly impacted by the number of custom fields that you have. So if you see on the left, create issue, which is the bottom two lines, when you have 820 custom fields, verse 1,640, the performance of creating an issue is twice as worse, or twice as slow, if you will. On the right side, it's talking about custom workflows. So again, 225 workflows is the dark line, 450 workflows is the light blue line. And again, notice create issue. This is an operation that your users do every single day, but the performance, again, is much slower the more custom workflows that you have. To help reinforce this point, I pulled this also off the Getting Started with JIRA Scale. If you go out and Google that, you'll find the document that I'm referring to. But again, the first sentence says, JIRA speed are most common affected by custom fields and workflows. And the last sentence, this means that you need to keep that JIRA configuration clean. So let's go back to a slide I showed you a second ago. What I want to focus in on is the custom fields and the workflows and compare the numbers across the 3 servers that we had. I stated back when we started in 2008, we were looking for a single solution that met the needs of many project teams across our organization. And JIRA has all kinds of flexibility. You can set up workflows per project, you can set up custom fields per project. a team would come to us and say, hey, we want it to do this, this, and this. And we're like, yeah, we can do that, right? And we'd go implement it. Another team would come to us. They want something a little bit different. Hey, we can do that too. We'd go implement that and see where it got us. We've got almost 1,000 custom fields and almost 200 custom workflows on that server. Now, the strategy here for Cerner is that on JIRA 2, that's where we're standardizing most of our software development teams. Okay? And when we rolled out JIRA 2 and started moving teams to JIRA 2, implementing new teams there, we took a pretty hard line on the customizations that we were going to allow. And notice at this point, JIRA 2 has been in production since probably mid-2012. That's where we did the purchase. But it's been in production since mid-2012. And we're only at 140 custom fields and about 140 and 14 workflows. And if you compare that to JIRA 3, as you heard in the keynotes, there's a lot of other teams or groups within your organization, or at least within our organization, that also use JIRA, like HR, finance, marketing, et cetera. And those do have very different needs than software development teams. And so we have allowed more customization over on our third instance than we do on our second instance. So how did we achieve this standardization on JIRA 2? Well, in beginning of this year, we implemented what we call the JIRA Steering Committee. I was talking to somebody at the TAM Day on Tuesday, and they have this exact same concept for their large JIRA instance. But essentially what we did is we took these power users, if you will, we grabbed one from each of the organizations that we support with JIRA, and we formed a committee. And when our help desk gets a request to customize the behavior of JIRA, we run it through this steering committee. And they look at it from the 80-20 type rule. Is this change that's being requested, is it going to be something that benefits the majority of our organization? If so, that's something that we're more inclined to implement. If it's something that's going to benefit a single team, or in a lot of cases, just a single user, that's something now that we push back hard on. And as you can see, we've had some success with that steering committee, maintaining more consistency over time. So again, standardize where possible. It can have a direct impact on your JIRA performance. That doesn't mean we don't add custom fields. It just means we scrutinize it very heavily. And we make that, we purposefully make that process just a little bit more painful for teams to go through. And they really have to justify their request with us before we'll actually do it. The third lesson that we learned along the way is we have to monitor the activity that's going on. In the early days of our JIRA experience, we were very reactionary. We were dealing with a single team, 20 associates. If we started to have performance issues, or we really didn't have it at 20, but as we added more teams on, as we had performance issues or scale issues, and maybe JIRA became unresponsive, the immediate answer was, let's boot the server, right? Or let's go cycle the service. And that works in smaller organizations or when the team is co-located. Hey guys, we're going to take a 2-minute downtime. We're cycling the service. We'll be back in a second. That got us, that only got us so far. Well, as we added more and more business processes on JIRA, we had more and more co-located or geographically distributed teams. That answer didn't fly within our organization. So we had to become much more precise, much more surgical about how we did root cause analysis on issues. We had to monitor our infrastructure better than we were doing at the time. So we introduced 2 tools at the end of 2013 and early 2014. How many people in here are familiar with Zabbix and use it within your organization? Okay, a few of you. What about Splunk? Okay, more people familiar with Splunk. So with Zabbix, it helps us monitor system resources, things like CPU, memory utilization, things like that. We can set up alerts if thresholds get reached that will email our teams, our systems team to tell us we need to go look at something. With Splunk, Splunk's more, I think of it as a log aggregation tool. We can run searches across the logs to see what errors we're encountering the most frequently, what exceptions. JQL has been a problem in our environment. Mike's going to talk a little bit about that here in a minute. We can run, this is a search for different JQL functions. What's really cool about the combination of these 2 tools is it allows us to aggregate information. And so when we have incidents, when we have problems, we can go look and see what were the physical characteristics of the server at that time? And we can aggregate that with, well, what messages were we seeing in the log at that time? And that's been extremely useful on a number of occasions. We're able to much more quickly get to root cause of issues. One example of that, I mentioned JQL. How many people in here have been bitten by, I think of it as a denial of service attack from your own organization via the REST API? One guy's about to jump out of his chair back here. I can relate. I would raise both hands. We have been bitten by that more times than I can count. One thing that we do out of Splunk is it sends us an email every Friday, and it tracks via the logs and the IP addresses that are hitting us, who's utilizing the REST API the most heavily. Now, I recognize a lot of the IP addresses on the left of this chart. It's a lot of our Crucible servers. We have 6 Crucible servers in our environment. And we've got app links, set up to JIRA. So those have just become kind of the standard norm. But if we see an IP address pop up there and we notice the percent is much higher than the rest, then we know we probably have a team that has just built a dashboard. That dashboard probably has about 5 or 6 widgets on it. Each one of those widgets, executes a JQL query, some of them fairly expensive. And you know what? That team probably wanted it to be real time. So it refreshes every second or every 2 seconds. And essentially in the past has created a denial of service for us. So Mike's going to talk a little bit about, with our data center approach, how have we attacked that problem. So monitoring activity. This really helps us project for the future as well. We can see where we've been the last 6 months, 12 months, 18, and what do we project it to look like the next 6, 12, or 18 months. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mike. He's going to talk, lessons 4 through 6.
All right. Everyone hear me? All right, thanks, Brian. So let's go. So in 2014, we were on version 6.2.4, and during 2014, we had around 55 outages, and most of those outages were caused by JQL functions. And so using our monitoring tool that Brian talked about, like Zabbix, we were able to just see what was going on during that outage. And what we would see is we see a single thread would get locked and it'd start consuming a lot of heap, and then we can even watch and say, oh, it's going to go down. So after it went down and we were doing our troubleshooting, we would go into Splunk, and we kind of look to see what was going on during that time. And the thing that we would see is a certain JQL function was being operated during that time. And so we would say, okay, that function's not working correctly or doesn't perform very well. Let's disable that one. So we would disable that one and tell the users that they need to use something else. And then we go on for a little while, maybe a month, maybe only a week or so, and then somebody would find a new JQL function and start using that, and then we'd have another outage. And so as we saw this pattern, we knew the solution wasn't just keep disabling them. We needed to have a better understanding about how these JQL functions are working. So working with our TAM, we were able to set up some time with Atlassian developer to be able to get to better understanding how they are working. So take this as an example. So this is something that we would have told our user is the correct way to create a JQL. So on the left side, you see they have the project qualifier that they only want Acme. So that's one of the things that we tell our users to make sure that they only do their project. On the right side, we have this parent issue function. This parent function, what it does is it returns subtasks based on what you pass it on the parent. So in this case, I'm asking to return all the subtasks that have a parent in one of those statuses. So again, this is something that we thought that looked fine. But after working with the Atlassian developer, we found out how it was actually working. So what it does is, how JIRA does it is it'll execute the left side, which is all the non-issue function stuff, and it'll pull that into memory. So in this case, it's doing project equal Acme. So in this case, it's also bringing in all issue types. So it's bringing that all into memory, and then it's doing the and on the right side. So then it executes the issue function, which brings all the subtasks that are apparent in one of those statuses across the whole instance. So you're bringing all that into memory, and on the right side with the parent function, that's across all projects. So you bring that all into memory, and then it does the intersection, and that's how you get your results. So because it's bringing all that into memory, that's what was causing some of our outages, was because of all that memory. And if it happened at the right time, it would cause an outage. So if you see here, we posted to our users that the better way to do that is to remove that project equal Acme from the left side and add it inside your issue function so that it doesn't pull so much into memory. So not only did we post that to our users, we also went to the database, the JIRA database, and looked for all the saved issue function or saved filters, and looked for any cases that people were using it incorrectly, and we asked the owners of those to correct those. So as we've talked about, you've heard in the keynote, and you guys all probably know that Atlassian products have a lot of add-ons. So when I did this slide in October, there was 923 add-ons that were in JIRA, and a lot of those are free. So at Cerner, our users will come to us and say, hey, I want this functionality. Do you know if anything exists? And we'll go out to the market and look for it. And or sometimes they'll even come to us and say, hey, I went out to Atlassian Market, and I like this plugin. Can you install it? So at first, we didn't really have a very good vetting process. We'd look at the cost and see if the functionality is what they were looking for. You know, we might put in a dev environment and let them play around with it a little bit, but then we would install it. So what ended up happening is we'd install plugins with not a very good vetting process, and then those plugins would might have some memory issues or cause a lot of outages, and we would have to end up uninstalling them. So the lesson here is just because you can't doesn't mean you should, meaning there's a lot of options out there for add-ons, but make sure you have a good vetting process. So one of the examples of how we vetted some add-ons was we had two very popular add-ons that provide JQL functions. And as I talked about earlier, that was one of our common outages. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to land on just one of those add-ons. So how we did that evaluation is, again, we went back to the JIRA database to pull back all the saved filters that users were using, and we created two CSV files. One of the CSV files was all the JQL using one add-on, add-on A, we'll call it, and then we generated another CSV with all the saved filters using add-on B. We then created a JMeter test that executed the JQL from the add-on A, and then we executed it using add-on B. By doing that, we were able to capture the results and compare them of each of those runs. And so what we compared using Zabbix, we'd compare how much CPU was used during that time, how much memory is consumed. We also verified that they both returned the same results, that they're acting the same way. And then the last thing, we would compare the response time. How quickly did they return? And by doing this test, we were able to clearly see that one of the add-ons did perform better than the other. And so we uninstalled the add-on B and went with A. The other thing that we were able to do with this test is we saw that certain functions didn't perform very well, and so we just disabled those completely. And then the last thing that we did with that after this test was we also disabled all the functions that weren't currently being used. So we queried the saved filters and seen which functions were being used, and if they weren't being used, we just disabled them. Because a lot of times users would find a new JQL function, like I mentioned, and start using it and then cause an outage, and it would kind of just blindside us. So again, if there's options for you to disable functionality on an add-on and only enable what you need, it'll prevent some of those surprises. And there's another thing that we actually got a benefit from this is working with our TAM, they recommended that we upgrade to 6.3. So again, we were on 6.2.4, and they said that there was some JQL engine performance improvements done on 6.3. So what we did was we ran the same test, and we ran it against 6.2.4 and 6.3.12, and we were able to see that 90% of our saved filters run better on 6.3.12, and so it was clear evidence to us that we should upgrade. So as Brian mentioned earlier, JIRA 2 is where we have standardized, and we've also recently in October moved to JIRA Data Center. We had two main reasons why we wanted to go to JIRA Data Center. One is we plan on adding about 10 to 15, 10,000 or so more users. So we're around 5,000 or so. We'll be adding 2 to 3 times more. And so the other thing that we wanted to be able to do is we never had a clear way to prevent the REST abuse that Brian talked about. So we want to be able to isolate those REST calls to a single server so that it doesn't have impact on our other users. So this is how we've set up JIRA data centers. So you see at the top, we have the JIRA user comes into our load balancer, and then it distributes the load. If it's going through the website, it's just a typical use case where the user goes to the website. It goes to one of the user server 1 or user server 2 is what we call them. And then on the right side, we have the REST server. So originally, we had set this up so that anything after /rest would go to the REST server. But the obstacle that we encountered was that JIRA itself actually calls REST as well. And so when we set that up, what it would do is a user would go in, and it would go to user server 1 or 2, and then JIRA would try to execute a REST call, and it wouldn't be able to maintain the session persistence, and then the functionality wouldn't work. So the way that we got it worked around that is, again, working with our TAM, we were able to figure out that to also not just check the /rest, but check the refer. The refer is a HTTP field, header field, that will specify where is that call coming from. So if if the value is our public JIRA URL, then we know it's coming from JIRA. But if it's empty or some other string, we know that it is coming from outside. And so that's why you see it's called our external REST server. And so again, the benefits of doing this is now when our developers create their dashboards and they do heavy hitting or something like that, it would only bring down that one server, and it's only impacting the people's dashboards, and it's not impacting our users, our day-to-day users that just go into the website. The last thing that we wanted to do is we wanted to be able to hit each of those servers directly. So there's a couple of use cases for this. One is Zabbix we talked about. We wanted to monitor directly to each of the servers, not through the load balancer. Because if we go through the load balancer, it's going to only return results for one of them. So we want to be able to monitor the CPU and the memory and all the things that Zabbix did with a single server, but we wanted to do it across all of them so if we knew which one was having performance issues. The other use case that we wanted to be able to go to each server directly is we wanted to set up our own server. So this is the bottom right here is our admin server. It's only for our team, and it's not inside the load balancer. But we're able to go on there, and it's only for our team to go on there and do things like, one of the things that we do with it is we can do a full index on that server, which in our environment, it takes about 2 hours downtime to be able to do a full index. So what we can do, instead of impacting any of our users taking down one of the other 3, we can take a downtime on the admin one and do a full index and then push it to the other ones, and that's a matter of 10 minutes. The obstacle that we encountered was when we tried to access the server box directly, it would redirect us to the public URL and then go through the load balancer, and again, we're back to where we started. So how we did it was, because the load balancer is communicating with each of the servers on the port 8080, we set up an Apache server that listens on 443, and by setting up that Apache server on each of those servers, we'll be able to directly connect to each of those servers that we want to. So today we talked about the lessons we've learned. We talked about the importance of staying current and how Atlassian continues to release performance improvements. We also talked about Standardize where possible by having fewer fields and fewer workflows can increase your performance. We talked about our monitoring tools and how we use Splunk and Zabbix. And we talked about evaluating plugins. There's a lot of functionality out there, but it doesn't mean you should install it, but make sure you have a good vetting process when you do install it. And we talked about the importance of educating your users. With JQL, it's very powerful, but make sure they understand how to use it correctly. And lastly, we talked about JIRA Data Center and how we've implemented to help prevent some of the outages that we've had with REST abuse. So I talked about in 2014, we had 55 outages. So far this year, by applying these lessons, we've reduced that to only 7 this year. And now with JIRA Data Center and be able to prevent some of that REST abuse, I think that number will be even smaller next year. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks guys. We've got time for some question and answers, so I'm just gonna read some of the ones that you guys have been submitting in the app, and if you haven't had a chance, please go in and do it. Can you guys tell us about how you scaled hardware, and is it a virtual environment?
So with the rollout of JIRA Data Center, we did actually move from VMs to physicals. We're probably on overpowered hardware at this point, but that is a change that we made within our environment. Because again, as Mike said, we're looking to add an additional 5,000 to 10,000 users over the course of the next year, and we felt like physicals was the right way to run that infrastructure.
Thank you. How are your JIRA instances connected, and how do teams on different projects work together?
Take that.
So are you talking about, repeat the question? Sorry, go ahead.
How are your JIRA instances connected, and don't those teams on different projects need to work together?
So we do have the app links set across on 1, 2, and 3, and so they do link between each other, but there is some limitations around that our users can't. But for the most part, we try to set up, if a team's already on JIRA 1, we'll go ahead and add them to JIRA 1 as well. with exception to the to JIRA 2, where we have Standardize, where we ask teams to actually go to JIRA 2.
Awesome. All right. Sorry about that. All right. So do you plan to archive issues at some point? And if so, how will you do that? And how are you going to access them later if need be?
No, that's something we're actually interested in doing right now. Again, we've just really got started the growth that we'll be seeing over the next year. So Brian and I actually had a conversation just this week about what is our process on potentially archiving down the road, but we haven't had that conversation yet.
Awesome. And how many full-time JIRA admins do y'all have?
So at Cerner, we actually have a partnership between our engineering organization and our hosting organization. So on the hosting side, we've got 2 SEs that aren't full-time. They actually do a number of different tools. So I'd say it's between I'm looking at one of them right now just to, come on, give me some notes here. So I don't know if it's between a half or 1 full-time FTE on their side. And then on our side, from a help desk perspective, we've got one person that answers all the incoming user requests today. We've got a backup, but I'd probably say 1 full-time on each side to manage the different servers.
So you talked about add-ons. How do you manage those across instances? And do you have the same add-ons across all instances?
Yeah, so we try to maintain the same add-ons, the same versions of each of those. I think there's a few exceptions, but for the most part, we keep them all the same.
Yeah, we'll generally install it on one, see how the performance goes. And we do this with our JIRA upgrades too. We upgrade one of the instances, let that bake in for a couple weeks, and if everything looks good, then we'll upgrade the other 2 right after that and install the add-ons right after that as well. We try to keep them as consistent as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I'm going to do 2 more questions for you guys. Can you tell us more about the role the JIRA admin server plays in your environment?
Yes. Again, the only main things that we're doing right now is if we want to be able to troubleshoot, so if the other 3 are having issues, we have one that's isolated from the rest of the users. We can go in there and troubleshoot. Maybe something's going on. It's really, again, we've only moved to it in October, so we haven't taken full advantage of that. But the other main use case for that was, again, to do the full index on that one without bringing one of the other 3s out of the load and be able to push that to the other 3.
So there's 10 more questions, but we're getting close to time. I'm just going to ask another one for you guys, which is, what's your outlook for the Royals for 2016?
It was a very exciting year, the last 2 years actually. So we've got high hopes for next year too.
Yeah.
But
Awesome. Thanks,
cool.
guys.
Thank you.